Welcome to Fieros Reborn. This is a Christmas jumper. Because every day is Christmas Day. Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas. Fuck. Alright, I felt like doing it early. Normally I do this after midnight. I had a little ritual routine going on, not like some kind of voodoo thing. After midnight I will do the sacred ritual. No, not at all. Let's see if this will go up my nose though, because there are certain items in this room that have not been checked. Look at that, it looks like a little demon, doesn't it? Hold on. Oh, fuck. It looks like those you know those gargoyles out of Ghostbusters? Blah 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 blah. The dogs that get that turn alive. They come alive. Come on. Oh, it doesn't open any further than that, does it? As oh, tickly. And if I do that again by accident, I'm going to rip my nose off. Okay, don't. Come on. It's not going to do it. Oh, I just have to have it as a side nose piercing. It's not even. It's spring loaded. Yeah, so it doesn't. That is an evil little thing. Look at that. If that was a thing, it is a thing. But if that was a real demon, you know, don't want to be near that. Well, that won't go up my nose. So but this will. This will. We can have a proper paperclip nose piercing. If I can figure out how to do it. I don't know why I have an obsession with putting things up my nose. It just started off as the one-time thing. One time only, sir. And then it's just developed into must see what. Yeah. It looks like a safety pin. But it's not, it's a paperclip. And we know that those two things are very, very different items. Alright then. So I will now put a peg on the other one. Oh, fuck that! And I will now put this thing up my nose. Oh, that won't go up there. I'm like a kid. You know those kids like Ralph Wiggum? I'm Ralph Wiggum, basically. Mrs. Hoover, I put a pencil up my nose. Yeah. How's it going, boys and girls? Let's, I was going to wrench that out, and I could possibly wrench my whole nose off if I'm not careful. Because we know how strong paper clips are, don't we? They hold the world together, they do paper clips. If it weren't for paper clips, the world would fall apart at the seams. Hold on. So this is what I'd look like if I was a 90s twonk. I'm a fire starter, twisted instigator. Shut up. I'm a fire starter, twisted motivator. I'm a fire starter, twisted instigator. Smack my pencil up. Change my stapling gun. Right, okay. Welcome to Fieros Reborn. I'm glad you're all on the same page as me, which is the page of doom. Okay, so it is Christmas in September. Christmas in September. Wake me up when September ends. I thought that was going to be a joke at the end of that, but then there wasn't. So, you know, I can't always legislate for what my mouth will do. Yeah, so I'm feeling fat again. I've just been playing a load of Final Fantasy VI or Final Fantasy III, depending on something. I feel fat. I've got computer game poisoning. Let's put some music on in the background. Yeah. So let's have copyright-free music. Copyright-free music. We put that on in the background, and then we can have like a laugh, can't we? In the background, we can just be. It'll be Fieros Reborn's traumatic life story with chilled, wicked music in the background. Because otherwise, it's quite silent, isn't it? Really, you can hear the paint drying. So why don't we watch the paint dry? There's no sound coming from my thing. Ah! Ha 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 ha! I make music. I make music. I bet they're going to say that I've got a copyright claim on against my own music there. Oh, there's some stuff is coming on now. Full length. Full girth as well. Small Emotions is a genre, apparently. Immersion by Gavin Luke. Energy low. Category relaxing. BPM 0. No beats per minute. Can't be bothered with beats anymore. This isn't correct music for what I'm doing though, is it? Let's try this one. Shadow Rest, it says. Shadow. It's not doing it. Or it is doing it and I just can't hear it because I'm not shadowy enough. There's a category here called drones. I didn't know they made music. Supposedly this is Shadow Rest and its category is dark. Doesn't sound very dark. Let's try this one called Those Little Things Scaled Down. Scaled down version. But it's 2 minutes long. That's not enough, really, is it? Let's go and see what the drones get. Oh, started now. Drones. Low drones. Low non-rhythmic drones. To be fair, I could tell my story to this background music. So, when I was 22, I'd come back from America. And I'd soaked my dad's book in the sink. My dad had said, "What are you doing?" And I shouted in his face extremely loudly, "When are you going to wake the fuck up?" And he said, I don't think he said anything actually. Anyway. Right, how long does this last for? 2 minutes as well. I want long ones. Long, please. We've got another one here called, this one's called Hopeful Drones 3, and the category is sad. Energy is low, so hopefully Hopeful Drones will provide some good, solid background. Come on, Hopeful Drones. Yeah. So my parents didn't want to. Oh man. My parents, they didn't want to listen to my story when I came back from New York. This is terrible. Let's put Dreamy. There's one called Dreamy. Right. This is going really badly. And so it sounds like the aeroplane. And I was on the aeroplane going home from New York. And I was watching Aladdin. And there was a super hot girl next to me. But I think she had a hairy lip. She had one of those sort of hairy faces. Hairy-faced, beautiful woman. Yeah, she had a hairy face. She was basically a Wookiee. This is terrible as well. I know what we need. We need a little bit of polka. Now. Let's get rid of some silliness and let's get the polka. We need the polka. We need the polka. So I got back from New York, right? And there I was in my with my giant beard and my straggly hair, and I met up with Mr. B after I got back, and I decided that I couldn't show him my true magical being and that I had to therefore wear some of my old clothes. And he came round and I was in full blown what they would call psychosis, what I would call spiritual revelation. And so I had this poster of Kurt Cobain on my wall, and then Mr. B, when he was around in my room, I said to him, "Oh, look, there's so it was there was a poster of Nirvana, Kurt Cobain playing live on In Utero, right? As in they were playing the In Utero tour, and there's a certain picture of them playing at that tour, and it was the picture of that sort of angel woman thing, and with Kurt Cobain playing in the foreground and the angel in the background, and Mr. B was in my room. This is wicked. This is definitely working for me. So yeah. So he was there. Oh, right. So he was there in my room. He had the poster in there. And I was in a very interesting frame of mind. Okay, you can't quite get the hang of that one. Let's try something else. Because I need to... If I can get the kind of feeling that I was in and put that in the music, then maybe this will be some deep shit, you know. Deep house. There we go. Mysterious. Category is mysterious, it says. This is called Stays the Same by Young Community Remix. Okay, well then. I don't know. Right. No, this is too fun. Right, we've got a different one called Dreamy. Come on then. I haven't worked out how to do this correctly yet, have I, obviously? 4 minutes this one is as well. Right, this might work. Yeah. So he was there in my room. I was tripping balls, basically, on no drugs at all, apart from my own mind. I was tripping balls. I was tripping balls. I was tripping. I was tripping balls. I was tripping balls. I was tripping balls. All right. Kurt Cobain was on the wall with his little angel woman thing in utero, tripping balls, and Mr. B was in. Mr. B was in the room. I thought tripping. I thought tripping. I thought balls. I thought tripping. I thought that Mr. B was God or Jesus. Or God. Jesus. Tripping. Balls. Chicken. Balls. Alright, so yeah. I figured. Tripping balls. I figured. I figured. I figured. Jesus. I figured. Mr. B was tripping. I figured. Right? I figured. Right? Figured. Jesus. Balls. I figured. This is wicked. Figured. Tripping. Balls. I. Right. Fuck me. This is too much, boys. Too much. Boys. Right. Yeah. Tripping. So, God damn it. Jesus. Balls. God damn it. Jesus. Tripping. Jesus. Balls. So I thought that Mr. B was Jesus or God, right? I was tripping balls. And tripping. And tripping. God, Jesus, balls, tripping. Tripping. I was in the room, right? Yeah. Tripping. On my own brain. Okay. And I was tripping balls. I was okay. So tripping balls. Okay, tripping. So yeah, so that was weird, eh? It was really weird. But I thought that let's pause for a moment because this is too no more. Right, so that's the gist of the story. I'm sure you've got the gist of it there. But yeah, I actually had the experience of Mr. B being I think that I was God and he was my son, and then there was another part to this whole thing, which is where the Kurt Cobain poster was like, Kurt Cobain was my guardian angel because there was an angel in the background and I was making these kind of metaphorical meanings out of it. Yeah, right, yeah. So, yeah. Oh, we seem to have lost all sound. That was fun though, wasn't it? I quite enjoyed that. Tripping balls. Yeah, and he was in this kind of mood. He was like, what are you talking about? Like, where are you going with this? What's going on? Like, what? Yeah, what are you trying to tell me here? And I was going, nah, man, like, you. And I'm not even sure that I was saying things in line with. I'm not even sure that I was saying things that were in line with the things that I was understanding. Like, I might have said something like, you're my son, or something like that. Or it's hard to describe it. It's like, how to describe it when it was like, it's a bit like if you were talking to someone who was high on, I don't know, weed or LSD or something, and from his perspective he was trying to talk to me like to understand things in a normal mindset kind of way, yeah, so like a logical mindset or a rational mindset or a sane mindset. And there I was having this like really intense spiritual mystical like, it was a real high, it was a real like, I felt like I was in touch with a deeper level of reality than other people were aware of. And so that was the real what do you call it, disjunct, where like where's the mystical music, eh? Traditional dance, world and countries, traditional dance is going to be like polka again, isn't it? Right, well, maybe I've maxed it out, maybe I've like broken it. I forgot where I was at now. Yeah, so I was in this kind of mystical place, and no one else was in there. So no one understood the feelings that I was going through. And it was more than even feelings. Like, it's so hard to describe other than to describe it as like being in an altered state of consciousness, like you would be if you were high on some kind of drug. But there was no drugs involved. It was the high of my own brain chemistry, if you like. At least that's what they told me. But from my experience, personally, I didn't have who experiences their brain chemistry. No one experiences their brain chemistry directly, do they? They experience sights and sounds and feelings and knowings and intuition and stuff like this, and hearing and whatever, and their internal thoughts and stuff. And so if you break down that little incident or moment, it was composed of me being in my room with Mr. B, after I hadn't seen him in probably 4 months or something like that. I decided that he wouldn't recognize me since I'd gone back from America. Like, he wouldn't recognize my character, and I'd had it in my mind that he wouldn't recognize who I was in terms of like how I was being. Because I was really deeply into this mystical, artistic, metaphorical way of living at that time. And also, don't know. Yeah, I just felt like I had to change into something that he would recognise me in. So I put on some clothes that were like from the time period when I was with him in the relationship, so that, you know, I don't know, maybe he would feel more comfortable with me. I don't know what exactly the purpose was of changing my clothes so that he would recognize me or something, whatever. But I did. And so he came over, and there's a sort of, I feel like it's winter. Yeah, it must be winter at that time, or autumn, sort of around this time, really, I suppose. September. No, maybe later than that. Difficult to know, but it was winter. I feel winter is in the air, and so he come into my room, and I don't know what we were doing in my room other than just having a chat. I think I'd invited him up to my room to show him like artwork and stuff that I'd been up to, and actually by that point I'd already done a lot of creative stuff, and I had it in these little boxes. And it's weird because a lot of the stuff, I did loads and loads of creative work during that period of time, and I've lost it all in terms of I've got rid of it all. I got rid of it all. And some of it was really good, and others stuff wasn't so good, but my drawing skills were really, really good back in those days. And I feel like I can't actually do what I used to do back then, which is weird because technically nothing has actually changed in my abilities. If anything, I've improved, technically speaking, because I draw all the time, so my pen control is much, much better. But something emotionally has changed, that I just can't draw figurative stuff in the same way that I used to. Figurative meaning like representational stuff, so drawing actual pictures of people or cartoons and stuff like that. I find it very, very difficult to draw things from the world. I tend to draw just more abstract representations of how I feel. And sorry, that wasn't the right feeling either. Reggae might do it. Yeah, reggae might be the kind of feeling that we need. And this is a bad thing, isn't it? Well, talk amongst yourselves. I'm going to try and find some decent background music to have here. This will do, won't it? Yeah. So, good. I can just leave that now in the background. Sorry about all of that. Okay, I'm right with you now. Yeah, okay. So, as I said, I was in my room and I was having all these mystical experiences and trying to trying to communicate that with him, and he wasn't understanding it at all, Mr. B. And I think he was starting to freak out a bit, basically. Um, Not that much, but a little bit. He was starting to freak out, and I just had this experience that he was myself. So I had this experience that he was myself, and I was God, and I was in him, but he was also God, and he was like Jesus or my son or something like that. And there was another part of it as well where I felt like he was like my brother or something. That I felt that he was my brother in some way, as in a spiritual brother. Yeah, and I know that sounds really cliche or something to say, "Oh, you're my spiritual brother" or whatever. No, but it was like there's something extra that I can't quite put into words, which is like this sensation of it was like a magical, mystical sensation around the knowing of this person as myself, as God, as Jesus, as my brother, as my son, something like that. There was this kind of like extra level of experience going on. So to just say, "Oh, he's my spiritual brother" or something, that makes it sound like something you would just say to a friend or something. You know, like, "Oh yeah, we're spiritual bros, man. We're like spiritual brothers, whatever." But this was like something really weird and powerful was happening in my experience, and I couldn't communicate it with him in a way that he understood, so he was starting to freak out. But I was like in some next place, man. It was cool. It was a good place. It wasn't. There was nothing negative about it. It was really. It felt like that was the truth of things, really. That we're all that way, as in we're all manifestations of God, something like that. Or that we are all just this one self, taking on different forms and being exhibited in one person and another person and millions of people all at the same time, that we all have the same universal self or the same God self underneath it all. And that most of our problems in life, in terms of our social problems, are caused by us forgetting our true oneness with each other. So we tend to focus our minds and our hearts on all the parts of us that are different, which this all sounds really, really simple and stupid and obvious, right? But there's a place inside us all that is actually the same in everyone. And like everything after that point is just a visage, an image, a mirage. So all the differences, they have a relative meaning, like they do have meaning and they do have value, but the truth, or the deepest truth of each person, is something that is the same in all people. So if we have forgotten our sameness of being and our that truth that is equal in all people, if we forget that and we focus too far or too much on all the differences between us, like our hair, our skin, our clothes, our jobs, our cars, our relationships, our sexuality, our gender, our race, did I say race already? Political leanings, whatever, club membership, whatever, all the things that are different and unique about us. If we focus on those too much and forget the equality of being, and the sameness of being, and the sameness of consciousness, really, the sameness of aliveness, the sameness of we are all here together, we are all in this one boat, we are all human. When we forget that and we focus too much on all these external indicators, then more and more problems start to come, and we start to experience the clash of these attributes versus these attributes, these differences versus these differences, and it's all people's interests in terms of their needs and their wants and the things that they are their best interests, if you like, whatever, are all different. So when one person wants this thing and another person wants another thing, and those two things happen to clash, then occasionally you get war. And if in those situations, if you return back to your sameness of being and realize that the deepest experience of life is that we are all this one being manifested in different forms. The purpose, I feel, of the differences between us is so that each individual person, as a manifestation of God, gets to experience a whole range and variety of experiences in life. So each individual person has all loads of different preferences and understandings and has been through their own unique journey, and that's unique and special and individual to each person. But that is also something that unites us all, which is that we all go through a special, unique, individual journey, and underneath all of that, we are also all this one human being, this one conscious being, manifesting throughout the whole of creation, or manifesting throughout the whole world, manifesting throughout all life forms, manifesting in everything at all times, and that each of us individually is a particular package of that, if that makes sense, a particular chunk of it, or a perspective or an aspect of this one consciousness, this one conscious being that we all are, this magical, mystical, manifesting life force of the universe. So that was one of the first experiences I had of direct contact with God, if you like, or that experience of God, where I knew deeply, really, really deeply and powerfully, mystical, that this person was actually myself, that there was not a separation, that it was myself appearing to me. I don't know if I mentioned that when I met God in the cat. I met God in the cat when I was in Louisiana, Baton Rouge, and I went out for a walk because Mrs. C was stressing me out for whatever reason. I went out for a walk and I found this little lake thing, and I went out for a walk around the lake and I met this random cat. This sounds like something out of a surreal dream or whatever, but there was a cat walking about by a lake, and it wasn't a wild cat, it was a domestic cat, but it was obviously off on a little hunt or something. And there was just this cat, and it was I think it was a ginger type of cat, yeah, like a big tabby cat. Would you call it a tabby cat? I don't know, but yeah. And he was walking around there, and I just knew that was God. That God was in a cat. I just knew it. Like, I just looked at this cat and I was like, oh my God, God is right in there. I can feel that. I can feel God in the cat. Yeah, and that was cool. And the annoying part of all these things is that is quite fleeting, or has been quite fleeting, to know God in whatever appearance that comes. So the cat, quite often cats give me the feeling of having spirit essence in them, so they are more of a spiritual being than they are just an animal. Like cats, I feel, have they're like a spirit child. I feel them to be spirit children, the cats. Yeah. Not all of them, but some of them have, like, they're really, really present. You know, these cats are really kind of in their body, and they're aware. Not all of them, as I say, because some cats just are whiny and scared all the time, and then you get cats that are really empowered cats, right? And then, like, they walk around, they jump about wherever, and they're an expression of God, that kind of seems to know what they're about, and yeah, so I feel that in them. Okay, weird. So there was some other things as well about that interaction with Mr. B. Oh, I can't remember how to describe it, but he had got like a little mark on his eye, right? And I had also got a little mark on my eye in the same place that had just spontaneously arisen that evening. That we both had this little thing, and that was one of the things that started me along the track of us being a spiritual brother, or a mirror of each other, or something like that. And then I think that was all in the cauldron of, oh my god, this person is actually me. They are me. They are me. There's no difference. Like, it's one self being manifested in two different forms. So yeah, and then what else? Well, obviously that interaction finished and he went home. But we're right in the thick of it now in terms of the story. That this is the period that my parents and the medical profession referred to as my full-blown psychosis. So let's have a look at what this stuff says here. The Phoenix, yeah, I was obsessed with this thing. It meant a lot to me, this Phoenix thing. So let's see. So yesterday I said I was constantly coming up with new ideas about cool things to do. I was loving every minute of it. There was a really creative, enjoyable aspect to this thing. I say that with the caveat that not everything that happened was cool. Let's see. My dad was particularly upset with my obsession with the Phoenix, because I thought I was sort of using the Phoenix in my own mind as a metaphor for what I was becoming. That I had risen from the ashes of my old self, so my old egoic self had dissolved, and I had taken on a kind of metaphorical identity as a phoenix, and I was referring to myself in my own mind as the phoenix, right? And my dad kind of took it a little too literally. He thought that I actually had changed my name or something, or was taking on an alter ego or whatever, and it wasn't that. From my experience or my perspective, he really didn't understand at all what the Phoenix meant to me, and it was almost like he'd completely got the wrong idea of where I was going with it. Yeah. Anyway, so he said, let me just read this bit. My dad was particularly upset with my obsession with the Phoenix. He thought that I thought that I was the Phoenix, that I had created an alter ego for myself. Wow. That's amazing, because I've basically just said exactly what I've written. I didn't actually read that before I said it earlier, just a second ago. So he listed such qualities as distant, no empathy, no compassion, isolated, as compared to my other ego, Ross, which he described as helpful, compassionate, creative, empathetic, and so on. So this was weird, because during that time, my parents, and especially my dad, thought that I was distant, had no empathy and no compassion, and was isolated, which is bizarre, because my experience of myself was that I was listening more to other people, and I was even making more empathetic sounds because I was listening to them from a deeper place. So I was responding from this deeper emotional place to these people, and my dad and my mum were, mainly my dad didn't get it. My mum never really commented on this, but my dad really didn't understand, because he was only ever relating to me from the mind. And like, I don't know if you notice now, but the way I speak, it comes from this resonant place within me. You can hear that whenever I say stuff, there's some kind of vibration, emotional vibration behind it. Well, I was in the same kind of way during that time in my life, but so it's very strange, because at the time I remember thinking, like, these people, my dad is really just projecting onto me how he feels about himself, or he's projecting onto me, or he's seeing in me all the things he won't see in himself. So he won't see that he lacks empathy, he doesn't have any compassion, he is isolated, because in fact my dad still doesn't really demonstrate the qualities of empathy, compassion, connectedness. He still is kind of a distant person. He's not warm and forthcoming with good-natured, accepting warmth, if that makes sense. He's kind of ish, but he relates mainly through jokes and wordplay, and on the rational level, on the logical level, on the mind level, and and everything is based on a story. So he doesn't really relate in the spontaneity of the moment very much. He lives still quite habitually. He's nowhere near as negative as he used to be, but he finds it very, very difficult to be completely open with his feelings, or have a space in which he hears the other person completely before thinking to jump in and say something next. So, I mean, there is more space in him than there has ever been before. But if I think back to the times when all this was going on, this guy was just a closed-minded arsehole, living his life through the eyes of he was superior to all other people because of his intellect. He had the right view on everything. He would always be in arguments with people, debates. He would always be in debates, rational arguments, rational discussions about this point or that point, which really boiled down to he would not let any other person, he wouldn't let anyone else have their own views without questioning it, criticizing it, trying to dismantle it or entangle it. And it was basically about him being defensive and not allowing other people to have their own thoughts, and needing to come out on top because of, I don't know, fear or something, or needing to be in control somehow, or needing to have the right answer, needing to be right, something like that. Yeah. And So it's very strange, and I experienced it as weird that I was getting this feedback from him saying that I had no empathy, I had no compassion, and I was isolated and all this stuff. And I was thinking, that's really strange because I'm actually listening to you for once, and you're not listening to me at all, and I'm resonating with what you're saying. Because a lot of the time that this was weird, like my parents would come to me and they would express all their problems with me. They were telling me all their problems about me, like that, how I was upsetting them and all this stuff. And I would listen to them, and I would go like, yeah, I understand, or I feel that, okay. And so I was seeing it from their point of view. Doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to change how I am or how I feel or what I'm doing just because you have a problem with me. That's not actually my responsibility. That's your problem, you know. And I was also listening to them. It's hard to describe, but listening to them from a deeper place, so that when they were saying this stuff in the kind of mind level about this problem, that problem, you know, this behavior, that behavior, the underlying real truth and feeling was they were saying something like, I'm suffering, I'm suffering, I'm suffering. And so I was going, yeah, you know, and like, and kind of, the point is that they were extremely mind identified, which means that they could not see beyond the thoughts that were in their head. So I could see quite clearly that these people were completely trapped in their own heads. They weren't actually able to see the reality that was in front of them. So what that meant was that I could laugh at this nonsense that they were coming out with. Like they were just making problems all the time. Problems, always speaking about problems, and in a way that they had no perspective on their own minds. They had no distance from their own minds. They couldn't see these thoughts in their head and go, that's a silly thought. They couldn't sort of see all these this kind of constellation, this matrix of thinking in their brain, and step back from it and say, well, does any of this actually count? Is any of this true or real? Everything was absolutely invested with a sense of self. So it was some difficult times, because I was getting feedback from these people about these qualities, and noticeably as well that it only seemed to relate to the people in my family, because when I actually spoke to the mental health professionals themselves, I seemed to get more headway from them, in that because they weren't so close-minded, some of the people who I was speaking to from the mental health professionals, they didn't judge me in the same way that my parents did. Like, my parents couldn't get with it because they supposedly knew who I was before, and then I'd had a radical change of personality in response to the spiritual material, right? So they couldn't understand how I had changed so quickly and why my ideas were so vastly different to where they were like 2 years before or something like that. So they were having this kind of difficulty catching up to how I changed all of a sudden. But then the mental health professionals themselves, so like my what's she called? Head nurse, basically. Head mental health nurse, community mental health nurse. She was kind of okay with me. She was cool with me. She talked to me normally, and I would talk to her normally, or my normal at that time, right? She even said she was jealous of me because I tended to have a lot more fun than anyone else, because I just didn't care so much about the seriousness of life. I was much more light-hearted and much more free in my expression of myself, so I didn't have a filter anymore. And I was really creative and enjoying myself a lot of the time. Not all the time, because I was having other difficulties that sometimes I just couldn't complete the tasks that I wanted to do. Like, I couldn't finish projects. I didn't have much longevity in terms of actually finishing some things, like a piece of work or a piece of writing or whatever. I was very, very flitty from thing to thing, and so that meant that the stuff that I did didn't really make much sense sometimes. Not all the time, sometimes it did. But yeah, and I remember this other mental health person his name was James. And there was this discussion that we were having one time where I was trying to explain to my parents the no self idea of Buddhism, and other philosophies as well, that state that there's no independent core self to anyone. There's no fixed static object within anyone. That we are all a kind of mixture of different, what the Buddhists would call causes and conditions, that our bodies are not solid in the way that we tend to think they are. And I was trying to explain this to them by saying about an apple, like, do you really know the essence of an apple? Do you really can you really ever know the fullness of an apple? Like, does it have a fixed identity? Because as it grows and changes, surely its identity grows and changes over time. And they just wouldn't have any of it at all. And so because I couldn't get through to them or present this philosophical understanding that I'd even read about in I'd read about it in Buddhist books, I'd read about it in other philosophical works as well, and I was trying to communicate this to them, and they were just, it was like it was ruining their whole underpinning of their reality or something to express these viewpoints and stuff. And I remember sat up against the radiator in that room, this next room to here, and have these people interrogating me, and I was trying to explain this idea that there's no singular self that you all think that I am. You all think that I am this. You think I am Ross. You think I'm my son, and as in my dad would be calling, my son is unwell. Ross is unwell, and what are you actually referring to when you say Ross? You know, this piece of sound, Ross. What does that actually refer to? What are you trying to refer to when you say that word, Ross? Is it just a word, or which part of this does it relate to? Does it relate to my shoulder, my arms? Is it all of it, the whole of my body? Is that what Ross is? And so if it's my body, then when my body dies, does Ross die? So Ross is the body, but then what about my mind? So is my mind Ross? Well, okay, all of it is Ross. So, I was just trying to kind of explain that there's no fixed static self, because obviously if I am the body, I am in a very different body now to the body I was in when I was 5 years old. This is a very different body to my 5-year-old body, right? So there's no fixed static self. The self is a constantly evolving, moving, like a movement, a flow of form, basically. And I was trying to explain this to them by using an apple, and then I tried to do it with a glass, like try to explain to them, well, which part of it is the glass, you know, as in you think you know that this is a glass, but have you actually ever seen it as well? I was trying to get them to do direct perceiving, by actually saying, well, don't just call it a glass and label it as though you know it. Actually look at the thing and touch the thing and be mindful of the sensations of it, because that's closer to what the real glass is. The truth of the glass is the direct perception of it without labeling it, but just to experience it clear. I was trying to explain this to them. They weren't having any of that as well, and they were saying that this is all like a sign of my madness. Whereas if you read spiritual books, this is, and like even Buddhist texts and stuff, or philosophical works, this stuff is all in there. And it's kind of horrible that I was trying to present some new ideas, basically, about what the self is and what the world is, and they were seeing it as a sign of mental illness. However, as I was about to say, the this one mental health nurse, I was talking about the glass. Do you actually perceive it? Are you perceiving the glass directly, or are you judging and labeling it? And do you just think you know? Do you have an image of it in your head already before you've even looked at it directly? Do you think you already know? So you've already got a kind of image of a glass, or you've got the word glass in your head. And so there's a difference between just thinking, oh yeah, it's a glass, and not really paying any attention to it, and then to actually experience the glass directly here and now. And have a real, spontaneous, lived, felt experience of the glass, which is actually much more satisfying. Yeah, and this mental health guy kind of opened his mind and even said what you mean, like how we tend to label things and have an image in our head of them. And I was like, yeah. So he was kind of open to it and open enough to try and understand things. And then my parents just kind of jumped in and started making me into a problem again. So it's very annoying, basically. Let's do a little bit more and then finish off. So my dad listed qualities such as distant, no empathy, no compassion, isolated, as compared to my other ego, Ross, which he described as helpful, compassionate, creative, empathetic, and so on. Little did he know that it was not an alter ego I had created for myself, but a power I thought actually existed within myself. It did exist within myself. It still does exist within myself. I'm just going to move on. I'm not going to qualify those statements. I even began calling my powers of healing Phoenix powers. Oh yeah, as can be seen from some of my cartoonized journal entries. I still hate how I took on the narrative of other people, because if I take out some of the language there, little did he know that it was not an alter ego I had created for myself, but a power that actually existed within myself. I began calling my powers of healing Phoenix powers, as can be seen from some of my cartoonized journal entries. Now, the next bit, it says, of course, I look back at those things now and struggle to understand what the hell I was going on about. It all made perfect sense at the time, but then it does when you're psychotic. I think that maybe that should be one of the assessment points, that you are absolutely convinced that your version of reality is the right one. But then again, many religious people could be described as such too. So those last bits are my dad speaking, basically. Even though I wrote it, that is the voice and viewpoint and understanding and rationale of my dad. Alright, I'm going to leave it there because my mind is blown and I cannot continue. So there you go. Thanks for watching. Sorry about the technical difficulties with the music earlier on. It was cool to have the polka though. That was quite fun. And then the like electronic dance stuff was quite cool. Triggered, not triggered. Jesus, tripping, balls. Yeah, okay. So you learned some stuff, I guess, where it's basically it was a big mush of confusion in the family system around this supposed psychosis, which no one ever really took the time to listen to me to understand things from my perspective. And so now, again, one of the points of why I'm doing this is just for my own feeling of self-satisfaction and for my own feeling of venting and self-expression, that I should tell my story from my perspective without calling myself psychotic and without invalidating my own experience by saying, oh, it all made sense at the time. It did make sense at the time. It was an experience that I had. It was a true experience that I had. I had those perceptions. I had those thoughts. I had those feelings. They were not signs of an illness. They were experiences that I was going through that I had, that had a meaning to me and a value to me. Bloody hell.